Once upon a time there was a kind emperor named Akbar. He was known far and wide for his wisdom, generosity, and sense of justice. His subjects adored him, and his court was a place where people from all walks of life could come to seek his counsel and assistance. He ruled over a vast and prosperous land where the fields were green, the rivers flowed abundantly, and the people lived in harmony. The kingdom was a testament to Akbar's fair and just rule, and it flourished under his leadership. One day, a poor Brahmin, a scholar and priest, came to Akbar's court. The Brahmin was known for his knowledge and piety, but despite his wisdom, he lived a life of modest means. He had traveled a long distance, hoping to find a solution to his pressing problem. The Brahmin looked worried and tired. His face was etched with lines of concern, and his eyes reflected the burden he carried. It was clear that he was in great distress, and the journey had taken a toll on him. "What troubles you, Brahmin?" asked Emperor Akbar kindly. His voice was gentle, and his eyes were filled with compassion. He had always been a ruler who cared deeply for his people, and he was eager to help those in need. With a heavy heart, the Brahmin explained his problem. He spoke of his daughter, a young woman of great virtue and beauty, who was soon to be married. The Brahmin's voice trembled as he shared his worries, and it was evident that he was deeply troubled. "Your Majesty," he said, "my daughter is soon to be married, but I am a poor man. I do not have enough money to pay for the wedding." His words were filled with sorrow, and he looked downcast as he spoke. The Brahmin's plight was a common one, but it was no less heartbreaking. The Brahmin continued, "I have tried everything within my means, but it is not enough. I fear that I will not be able to give my daughter the wedding she deserves. She is a good and dutiful daughter, and she has always brought honor to our family. It pains me to think that I cannot provide for her in this important moment of her life." The Brahmin's words touched Emperor Akbar deeply. He could see the genuine concern and love the Brahmin had for his daughter. Akbar knew that a wedding was not just a ceremony, but a significant event that marked the beginning of a new chapter in a person's life. He understood the importance of ensuring that the Brahmin's daughter had a wedding that would bring joy and honor to her family. Akbar was known for his generosity. He wanted to help the poor Brahmin. "Tell me," he said, "how much money do you need?" "Your Majesty," said the Brahmin, "I need 1,000 gold coins." Akbar smiled. 1,000 coins was a small amount for the emperor, but he decided to have some fun. "Very well," he declared, "I shall give you the money, but first you must stand neck-deep in the palace lake all night." The Brahmin was shocked. He had never imagined that he would find himself in such a dire situation. The cold winter had already made life difficult, but now he was faced with an even greater challenge. The Brahmin had always been a man of faith and wisdom, but this time he needed more than just his beliefs to survive. He needed a miracle, or at least a clever trick to get through the night. It was winter and the lake water was freezing cold. The surface of the lake was covered with a thin layer of ice, and the air was so frigid that it seemed to cut through his skin like a knife. The Brahmin knew that stepping into the lake would be a test of his endurance and willpower. He had heard stories of people who had perished in such conditions, but he had no other choice. The money he desperately needed was on the line, and he couldn't afford to fail. But he desperately needed the money. His family was depending on him, and he couldn't let them down. The Brahmin stood by the edge of the lake, contemplating his next move. He took a deep breath, trying to gather his courage. The thought of his loved ones gave him the strength he needed to take the first step. He knew that this was a test not just of his physical strength, but of his mental fortitude as well. So, as the sun began to set, he stepped into the icy water. The cold was unbearable, and it took every ounce of his willpower to keep moving forward. Each step felt like 1,000 needles piercing his skin, but he couldn't turn back now. The sun's last rays cast a golden glow over the lake, creating a stark contrast with the freezing water. The Brahmin knew that the night ahead would be long and torturous, but he was determined to see it through. All night long the Brahmin shivered in the cold. The darkness enveloped him, and the only sounds were the howling wind and the occasional crack of ice. His body was numb, and he could barely feel his limbs, but he kept reminding himself of the reward that awaited him if he could endure the night. The Brahmin's mind wandered to thoughts of warmth and comfort, but he quickly pushed them aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. He kept his eyes fixed on the bright lights coming from the palace windows. The lights were a beacon of hope in the otherwise desolate landscape. They reminded him of the warmth and safety that awaited him once he completed his ordeal. The Brahmin imagined the palace filled with laughter and joy, a stark contrast to his current predicament. The lights gave him something to focus on, a goal to strive towards as he battled the cold. He imagined they were warm flames keeping him company. The thought of the flames brought a small measure of comfort to his frozen body. He pictured himself sitting by a roaring fire, feeling the heat seep into his bones. This mental image became his anchor, helping him to endure the long hours of the night. The Brahmin knew that his mind was his greatest ally in this struggle, and he used it to create a sense of warmth and companionship. Finally, morning arrived, and the Brahmin came out of the lake, freezing but alive. The first light of dawn brought a sense of relief and accomplishment. He had survived the night and his determination had paid off. The Brahmin's body was exhausted, but his spirit was triumphant. He knew that he had proven his strength and resilience not just to himself but to everyone who had doubted him. As he emerged from the icy water, he felt a renewed sense of purpose and hope for the future. Akbar was impressed. The emperor had always been known for his wisdom and fairness, and he took great pride in recognizing the extraordinary feats of his subjects. This time, he was particularly amazed by the Brahmin who had managed to endure the freezing cold of the lake throughout the night. It was a feat that seemed almost impossible to believe, and yet, here was the Brahmin, standing before him, having accomplished it. He had never known anyone to withstand such cold for so long. "Amazing!" he exclaimed. The courtiers around him nodded in agreement, their faces reflecting the same astonishment. The story of the Brahmin's endurance had quickly spread throughout the palace, and everyone was eager to hear how he had managed such an incredible feat. "How did you manage to stay in the lake all night?" Akbar asked, his voice filled with genuine curiosity. The Brahmin, shivering slightly from the memory of the cold, looked up at the emperor with a humble expression. He knew that his answer would have to be convincing to satisfy the emperor's curiosity and the skepticism of the court. "Your Majesty," replied the Brahmin, "I kept my eyes on the lights from your palace windows. The warmth of those lights gave me the strength to endure the cold." The Brahmin's voice was steady, but there was a hint of reverence as he spoke of the palace lights. To him, they were not just lights, they were a symbol of hope and warmth in the midst of the freezing night. "Their warmth gave me strength." The Brahmin's words hung in the air, and for a moment, there was silence in the court. The courtiers exchanged glances, some nodding in understanding, while others remained skeptical. The idea that the mere sight of distant lights could provide warmth seemed far-fetched to many. Birbal, the emperor's clever advisor, was listening to the conversation. Known for his sharp intellect and keen sense of justice, Birbal had always been a trusted confidant of Emperor Akbar. He had a knack for seeing through deception and uncovering the truth, no matter how well it was hidden. He had his doubts about the Brahmin's story. Birbal's mind was racing as he considered the Brahmin's explanation. Could it really be true that the sight of the palace lights had provided enough warmth to survive the freezing night? Or was there more to the story than the Brahmin was letting on? How could the palace lights possibly keep someone warm from so far away, he wondered. Birbal knew that he needed to investigate further. The Brahmin's story, while touching and poetic, did not sit well with his logical mind. He decided that he would find a way to test the Brahmin's claim and uncover the truth behind this incredible tale. Birbal decided to teach the Brahmin a lesson. The next day, he invited Akbar to his house for dinner. Akbar arrived at Birbal's house, hungry and eager to eat. "Birbal," said Akbar, "I am famished. Where is the food?" "Your Majesty," replied Birbal, "dinner is almost ready. Please be patient." Time passed, but dinner was still not served. Akbar grew impatient. He peeked into the kitchen and saw a large pot of water hanging over a low fire. "Birbal," grumbled Akbar, "why are you boiling just water? When will dinner be ready?" "Soon, Your Majesty," said Birbal with a smile. "The heat from the fire will cook the food in this pot." Akbar stared at Birbal, confused. Then he burst into laughter. He finally understood what Birbal was trying to say. "You are right, Birbal!" exclaimed Akbar. "Just as this tiny fire cannot cook food in a pot from so far away, the palace lights could not have kept the Brahmin warm in the lake." Birbal nodded. "The Brahmin was not being truthful, Your Majesty." Akbar summoned the Brahmin. "Brahmin," he said, "I know you lied to me, but I admire your cleverness. You braved the cold lake all night, and that takes courage." The Brahmin was ashamed. He bowed his head. "You are right, Your Majesty. Please forgive me." Akbar smiled. "Do not worry," he said. I promised you 1,000 gold coins, but because of your bravery, I shall give you 2,000. The Brahmin was overjoyed. He thanked Akbar and Birbal and left the palace a happy man. From that day on, he promised to always be honest. And so, the tale of the clever Brahmin and the Cold Lake Challenge became a legend in Akbar's court. It reminded everyone that honesty is always the best policy, and even a clever trick can be unraveled by wisdom and wit.